faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Lying. In 2009, Fox TV in the US launched an American drama series with the Chinese title Don't Lie to Me. The protagonist in the show can determine if someone is lying based on subtle facial expressions. This drama sparked a lot of curiosity about detecting lies. Is using microexpressions to judge lying reliable? Besides microexpressions, what other methods can identify lies? Can lie detectors really detect lies? All these questions can be answered in this book. The author of this book, Paul Ekman, was the consultant for the drama Don't Lie to Me. All the knowledge about microexpressions in the show comes from his research. And Ekman is a psychology professor at the University of California Medical School, mainly researching emotional expression and related physiological activities. He has conducted in-depth studies on the expressions of various groups like psychiatric patients, spies, and serial killers. In 1991, Ekman received the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and is one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. This book, Lying, is Ekman's representative work. It's a popular science book with 11 chapters and 250,000 words. In this popular science work on lying, Ekman analyzes the forms of lies and the psychology of liars from a theoretical perspective, while also introducing many practical methods for detecting lies. He also provides valuable advice on mistakes that can occur when identifying lies. Since its publication in 1985, this book has been highly praised and listed as required reading in criminology by many law enforcement agencies in Europe and America. Agencies like the FBI, CIA, courts, and police departments have invited Ekman to conduct training sessions to enhance law enforcement officers' ability to detect lies. Animation studios like Pixar and Industrial Light and Magic have also invited Ekman as a consultant to ensure the accuracy of animated characters' expressions. Today, I'll be interpreting the third edition of this book, revised in 2001, which added some new content compared to the first edition. Next, I'll interpret the main content of this book through 3 parts. So, first, what is a lie? What emotional fluctuations does lying cause in people? Second, how to detect lies. Third, are lie detectors really useful? Let's start with the first part. What is a lie? What emotions do people experience when lying?
The author defines lying as an intentional act of deliberately misleading others without their knowledge.
There are 2 main forms of lies: concealment and fabrication. Concealment means the liar withholds certain facts, but what they say is true, while fabrication goes a step further. Liars not only conceal facts, but also fabricate false statements out of thin air. Generally, liars prefer concealment, mainly because it's harder to expose. Fabrication means inventing falsehoods, and falsehoods can conflict with facts, making them easier to detect. For example, if a husband loses money in stock trading and doesn't tell his wife, he might conceal it for a while. But if the husband, to save face, fabricates a lie and tells his wife he made money in stocks, she might ask what stocks he bought, how much he earned, and demand that he use some money for household expenses. The probability of the lie being exposed increases significantly, although concealment is harder to detect. But in many situations, liars can't choose concealment and have to fabricate. For instance, if a wife discovers ambiguous WeChat messages between her husband and a female colleague and confronts him, he can't conceal it and must choose to confess or fabricate a lie. That's all for now. We've discussed the 2 main forms of lies: concealment and fabrication. Most people also experience specific emotions when lying. These emotions are hard to completely conceal and manifest through expressions, voice, and other behaviors. The author summarizes these emotions into 3 types. The first is the fear of being caught. Mild fear is hard to detect and may even alert the liar to stay vigilant and avoid loopholes when fabricating lies. but when fear becomes intense, it manifests in various behaviors. Liars might turn pale, stammer, or show fearful expressions, all of which can be behavioral clues for detecting lies. The author believes that the main factor influencing fear is whether the person being lied to is easily deceived. If the liar thinks the other person is gullible and will believe anything they say, fear naturally decreases significantly. If the liar knows the other person is smart enough to analyze the lie from all angles, the liar's psychological burden increases, fear rises, and they're more likely to slip up. In fact, the second emotion of a liar is the guilt of lying, which refers to the unease of conscience caused by deceiving others. The more familiar the liar is with the deceived, or the more the deceived trusts the liar, and the greater the loss caused by the lie to the deceived, the greater the liar's guilt. That's a liar lowering their gaze and avoiding eye contact is a typical manifestation of guilt. The third emotion of a liar is the pleasure derived from lying. For some, lying is a challenge that can bring a sense of accomplishment, especially when the deceived is notoriously difficult to fool, or the lie is particularly complex. This can make some liars feel thrill and excitement, with an impulse to prove their ability by deceiving others. These emotions also manifest in expressions, voice, etc., becoming behavioral clues for detecting lies. All right, let's summarize the content of the first part. A lie is an intentional act of deliberately misleading others. Liars may experience three emotions: fear, guilt, and pleasure. Now that we understand the liar's psychology. In the second part, let's discuss how to detect lies. One method is to find the liar's verbal loopholes. As mentioned earlier, fabricated lies can conflict with facts. For example, if a job applicant claims to have managed a very famous project, but when asked about specific details by the interviewer, the applicant knows nothing, it's basically certain that the applicant is lying. No. Looking for verbal loopholes is the most common method people use to detect lies. In comparison, detecting a liar's emotional fluctuations is more subtle and difficult, and this is exactly the focus of the author's research. In the book, the author mainly introduces 4 types of behavioral clues that help identify emotional fluctuations: voice, physiological changes from the autonomic nervous system, body language, and facial expressions. First, let's talk about the first type of behavioral clue: voice. When a liar hasn't prepared their words in advance and needs to think while speaking, or when their fear is too intense, they may be unable to express themselves smoothly. At this time, the liar's speech may have overly long or frequent pauses. They might also stutter, such as repeating a word repeatedly, or have many meaningless filler words like "oh." Additionally, pitch is also an important vocal clue. A study points out that 70% of people raise their pitch and speak faster when they feel fear, panic, or upset. In his own experiments, the author also found that many people easily raise their pitch due to fear when lying. Additionally, research indicates that when people feel guilt, sadness, or frustration, their pitch lowers. So, when someone's pitch changes compared to usual, we can analyze the underlying reasons based on context to determine if they're lying. The second type of behavioral clue for detecting lies is physiological changes brought by the autonomic nervous system. Simply put, the autonomic nervous system controls involuntary physiological activities like heartbeat, breathing, and sweating. When people feel fear, guilt, or excitement, they involuntarily experience faster heartbeat, accelerated breathing, and increased sweating. By observing these physiological changes, we can detect abnormal emotional fluctuations in a person. In fact, this is precisely how lie detectors work. Lie detectors don't directly detect lies. They measure breathing depth or rate, heart rate, and sweating. By comparing these physiological data under different conditions, examiners judge whether the subject is lying. The third type of behavioral clue is body language. 2 types of body language can serve as lie detection clues. The first is body symbols. which have clear meanings in social culture. These are well-known postures where meaning is understood even without words. For example, nodding means agreement, the middle finger signifies insult, shrugging shows indifference or inability, all body symbols. People use them subconsciously, but when lying, they focus on words while body language may contradict speech, revealing deception. The author designed an experiment where a professor questioned medical students about career plans. Whether students said they'd pursue research or clinical work, the professor criticized them harshly to create pressure. The author then recorded students' every move with hidden cameras. The first student's actions astonished the author. Within minutes, the author saw this student place his hand on his knee and flip off the professor, and it lasted a full minute. Although he looked very calm on the outside, his body symbols revealed his true feelings.
That is, he was already furious.
In another experiment, the author had some nursing students watch medical videos that caused physical discomfort, such as bloody scenes of burn patients undergoing amputations. After the video ended, the author would ask if the students wanted to watch it again. Almost every nursing student said yes, but the author noticed that when they said yes, they accompanied it with a slight shrug, indicating they didn't really want to. When lying, body symbols generally have two additional features. First, the body symbol is only a fragment, not a complete action. For example, a complete shrug involves both shoulders rising together, sometimes with palms facing up or eyebrows raised. But when lying, the body symbol's amplitude is very small. A shrug might just be a slight lift on one side, without any accompanying actions. This is because body symbols express suppressed, hidden emotions, so the amplitude is minimized. The second feature of body symbols when lying is that they don't appear in normal positions. Normal body symbols mostly appear in conspicuous positions in front of the body. In other words, to make it easily visible to others. For example, flipping the middle finger is usually done by raising the finger in front of the chest. But when lying, to avoid being too conspicuous, it often appears in less noticeable positions. For instance, the student mentioned earlier flipped off the professor by placing his hand on his knee. The second type of body clue is body strokes, which are actions that assist in expressing speech, usually used to emphasize tone or highlight key points. Some people snap their fingers or make various gestures when speaking, and these all fall under body strokes. The author believes that body strokes decrease in two situations. First, when the person lacks emotional investment in what they're saying, feeling it doesn't concern them. Therefore, when someone shows concern or enthusiasm about something, but their body strokes don't increase, it can be suspected that they're lying. The second situation is when people are hesitant about what to say. Those with many body strokes are usually talkative and rarely pause to think. If a person hasn't thought through what to say next and focuses on how to say it, naturally, they have no time for body strokes. No. Faithfully delivering value. Interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Lying. In 2009, Fox TV in the US launched an American drama series with the Chinese title Don't Lie to Me. The protagonist in the show can determine if someone is lying based on subtle facial expressions. This drama sparked a lot of curiosity about detecting lies. Is using microexpressions to judge lying reliable? Besides microexpressions, what other methods can identify lies?
Can lie detectors really detect lies?
All these questions can be answered in this book. The author of this book, Paul Ekman, was the consultant for the drama Don't Lie to Me. All the knowledge about microexpressions in the show comes from his research. Ekman is a psychology professor at the University of California Medical School, mainly researching emotional expression and related physiological activities. He has conducted in-depth studies on the expressions of various groups like psychiatric patients, spies, and serial killers. In 1991, Ekman received the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and is one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. End of section 1. EARS. This book, Lying, is Ekman's representative work. It's a popular science book with 11 chapters and 250,000 words. In this popular science work on lying, Ekman analyzes the forms of lies and the psychology of liars from a theoretical perspective, while also introducing many practical methods for detecting lies. He also provides valuable advice on mistakes that can occur when identifying lies. Since its publication in 1985, this book has been highly praised and listed as required reading in criminology by many law enforcement agencies in Europe and America. And now agencies like the FBI, CIA, courts, and police departments have invited Ekman to conduct training sessions to enhance law enforcement officers' ability to detect lies. Animation studios like Pixar and Industrial Light and Magic have also invited Ekman as a consultant to ensure the accuracy of animated characters' expressions. Today, I'll be interpreting the third edition of this book, revised in 2001, which added some new content compared to the first edition. Next, I'll interpret the main content of this book through 3 parts. Now, first, what is a lie? The author analyzes the movement of involuntary muscles during sadness and fear. First, let's talk about sadness. When people show genuine sadness, their gaze lowers, the inner corners of their eyebrows raise, making them droop down. This makes the upper eyelids appear triangular and creates wrinkles in the middle of the forehead. This movement of involuntary muscles is difficult to fake. Among the author's test subjects, less than 15% could voluntarily make this expression. So when someone appears sad but lacks these expressions, they might be lying. Next, let's discuss fear. When people feel fear, their eyes widen, eyebrows raise and draw together. Among the author's subjects, less than 10% could voluntarily control their eyebrows to do this. When feeling fear, people's upper eyelids also lift with the eyebrows, while the lower eyelids become tense. This is also an expression that's hard to deliberately produce. So if you're now in front of a mirror desperately contorting your face to see what sad eyebrows or fearful eyelids look like, you probably won't succeed. However, the book provides corresponding photos. Interested listeners can look them up. The third facial clue is asymmetry. After studying numerous facial expression photos, the author found most deliberately feigned expressions show asymmetry, like when fear pulls mouth corners back toward ears. And if fear is faked, the extent of pull on left and right mouth corners will differ, whereas most genuine expressions are symmetrical. The author believes this relates to brain regions controlling expressions. When faking expressions, left and right brains separately control facial sides with unequal ability, like hand dexterity differences, making asymmetry inevitable. But during genuine emotional displays, more primitive brain regions control entire facial movements, enabling symmetry. The fourth facial clue is expressions lasting too long. The author notes truly heartfelt expressions are brief, usually seconds, especially surprise, which is even shorter. Genuine surprise lasts only about 1 second from onset to fade. The author's standard is that any expression lasting over 5 seconds can basically be considered fake. The fifth facial clue for lying is when the expression appears after words or actions. Expressions are directly linked to the brain regions responsible for emotions. Unless deliberately concealed, emotions usually show first on the face. For example, if someone acts very angry, they might first say, "I'm so mad at you." Or they slam the table first and only then show an angry expression. Such an expression is likely feigned. So far, we've covered what behavioral clues might appear when lying. The author repeatedly emphasizes in the book that when using these behavioral clues to detect lies, you gotta be super cautious. You can't just assume someone's lying because they show these signs. There are two reasons. First, individual differences. Everyone's got their own behavioral habits. Many of the behavioral clues mentioned earlier might just be someone's normal way of acting. So, some folks naturally stutter, often pausing and stumbling when they talk. Others might not use gestures much, or their facial expressions are just naturally uneven. If we ignore these individual quirks, it's easy to mistake truth for lies. So, how do we avoid misjudgment due to individual differences? The author believes we should base our judgment on the suspect's everyday behavior. Before trying to spot lies, it's best to have a series of chats with the suspect about non-stressful stuff to get familiar with how they normally act. Then, when the time's right, we bring up key topics and watch for any unusual behaviors to figure out if they're lying. Like, if someone was smooth talking before but starts stumbling when a specific issue comes up, it's more likely they're fibbing. Like, the second reason is that different emotions can cause the same behavior. It's tough to pinpoint exactly which emotion is driving a particular action. The author calls this the Othello error. This name comes from Shakespeare's play Othello, where the hero Othello suspects his wife of cheating with his lieutenant and threatens to kill her. The wife demands to confront the lieutenant, but Othello tells her he's already killed him. Knowing she can't clear her name, the wife shows fear and despair. However, Othello interpreted his wife's behavior as grief over her lover's death, further confirming his suspicions. The Othello error is a trap to be especially careful of when detecting lies. For example, when police interrogate a suspect whose pitch rises, shows micro-expressions of fear, and sweats more. Even so, police can't conclude this is fear of being caught lying. The suspect might fear being wrongfully accused or feel nervous facing police, emotions causing identical behaviors. The author suggests that when spotting deception clues, we must first ask, could this be an honest person's emotional reaction to suspicion? I think, to eliminate this possibility, consider the person's personality traits. For instance, someone arrogant who looks down on others. Such a person would get angry when suspected, but rarely fear wrongful accusation. If fear appears in them, it likely indicates deception. Whereas a timid, insecure person expecting the worst would easily fear wrongful accusation, their fear can't serve as deception evidence. Yet even so, the Othello error remains hard to avoid. No one in the world can detect lies with 100% accuracy. Even experts make mistakes. Thus, the author stresses these methods are only supplementary tools, not sole proof of deception. We can use suspicious behaviors to hypothesize about lies, then find solid witnesses or evidence to expose deception, but never conclude someone's lying based solely on behavioral clues. Finally, the author reminds readers, absence of deception clues doesn't mean someone's truthful. In research, the author found natural-born lying experts who feel no guilt, remain calm, and show zero tells. If they avoid verbal loopholes, they're nearly undetectable. Hitler was a natural liar, lying without fear or guilt, leaving no traces. In September 1938, Hitler promised British Prime Minister Chamberlain that Germany wouldn't invade Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain later told Congress he believed Hitler was a man of his word. But before meeting Chamberlain, Hitler had secretly mobilized troops to invade Czechoslovakia. His promise was only to lull other countries into complacency. All right, let's summarize part 2. 4 behavioral clues detect emotional fluctuations in liars: voice, physiological changes from autonomic nerves, body language, and expressions. When using these clues, we must consider individual differences to avoid the Othello error. These methods mainly rely on human observation and analysis. With technological advances, many law enforcement agencies use polygraphs, but opinions on their accuracy vary. So the author also focuses on whether lie detectors are truly useful. In part 3, we'll address this question. As mentioned, polygraphs measure autonomic physiological changes, but can't directly detect lies. Which specific questions to ask during polygraph tests? How valuable is polygraph data? Is it affected by individual differences or Othello error? This requires examiner judgment.
Thus, polygraph results depend not just on device accuracy, but also on examiners' methods and analytical skills.
Examiners commonly use two methods. First is the control question technique. For example, an examiner identifying a theft suspect.
Before case-related questions, examiners ask irrelevant questions as baseline references. These are control questions.
For instance, before age 18, did you ever take something that didn't belong to you? Examiners hope suspects lie on control questions to better identify deception later. The logic, if innocent, suspects should be more nervous answering control questions than case questions.
For case questions, they just tell truth. Control questions make them worry.
If I answer poorly, will examiners think I'm guilty? Increases anxiety and physiological responses. Taking that question as an example, most people have taken things that didn't belong to them without permission before adulthood. But innocent suspects worry that admitting this would increase suspicion, so they tend to lie. The polygraph would show strong physiological changes, yet the innocent remain relatively calm when answering case questions. Conversely, if the suspect is guilty, they focus more on case questions and lie about them. Therefore, regardless of truthfulness on control questions, physiological changes intensify during case questions. To summarize the control question technique, if physiological changes are stronger during control questions than case questions, the suspect is truthful. Otherwise, they're lying.
But many scholars note this logic isn't foolproof. Innocent people may show stronger reactions to case questions for various reasons.
For instance, innocents worry about polygraph accuracy, fear wrongful accusation, or stress about case outcomes' impact. Thus, heightened nervousness is natural, basic human psychology. Therefore, the control question technique often mistakes truth for lies. The second common polygraph method is the guilty knowledge test. This requires examiners to know details only the criminal would know.
Suppose a bank is robbed, with $150,000 stolen.
The examiner asks, if you robbed it, how much did you steal?
Multiple options are given, e.g. $100K, $120K, $150K. The suspect answers each option with no or I don't know. Crime. The guilty knowledge test assumes criminals show stronger physiological reactions when denying correct options versus wrong ones. Practical application. Examiners ask multiple questions. Stronger reactions to correct options across questions suggest guilt versus control questions. This method reduces wrongful accusations since innocents rarely react strongly to correct options across questions. But problems remain. Faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Lying. In 2009, Fox TV in the US launched an American drama series with the Chinese title Don't Lie to Me. The protagonist in the show can determine if someone is lying based on subtle facial expressions. This drama sparked a lot of curiosity about detecting lies. Is using microexpressions to judge lying reliable? Besides microexpressions, what other methods can identify lies? Can lie detectors really detect lies? All these questions can be answered in this book. The author of this book, Paul Ekman, was the consultant for the drama Don't Lie to Me. All the knowledge about microexpressions in the show comes from his research. Ekman is a psychology professor at the University of California Medical School, mainly researching emotional expression and related physiological activities. He has conducted in-depth studies on the expressions of various groups, like psychiatric patients, spies, and serial killers. In 1991, Ekman received the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and is one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. Oh! This book, Lying, is Ekman's representative work. It's a popular science book with 11 chapters and 250,000 words. In this popular science work on lying, Ekman analyzes the forms of lies and the psychology of liars from a theoretical perspective, while also introducing many practical methods for detecting lies. He also provides valuable advice on mistakes that can occur when identifying lies. Since its publication in 1985, this book has been highly praised and listed as required reading in criminology by many law enforcement agencies in Europe and America. So, agencies like the FBI, CIA, courts, and police departments have invited Ekman to conduct training sessions to enhance law enforcement officers' ability to detect lies. And that interesting and diverse application, animation studios like Pixar and Industrial Light and Magic have also invited Ekman as a consultant to ensure the accuracy of animated characters' expressions. Today, I'll be interpreting the third edition of this book, revised in 2001, which added some new content compared to the first edition. Next, I'll interpret the main content of this book through three parts. First, what is a lie? What emotional fluctuations does lying cause in people? Second, how to detect lies. Third, are lie detectors really useful? Let's start with the first part. What is a lie? What emotions do people experience when lying? The author defines lying as an intentional act of deliberately misleading others without their knowledge